Hello and welcome to the Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm your host and friend Pavan Chawla, and with me today is someone I'm very excited to have as a guest on my show, a wonderful, multifaceted, respected leader. Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager Asia of BBC Studios. Phil's in Singapore, I'm in Mumbai, and we're recording on my favorite podcast recording platform, Squadcast.fm. Phil, welcome to the Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Phil, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But before we get to it, allow me the pleasure of introducing you to my listeners. So here goes. Phil Hardman is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Asia for BBC Studios based in Singapore. He's responsible for developing and delivering the Asia growth strategy across the global distribution businesses in Southeast Asia, India, Japan, and South Korea. In his role as GM for Asia, Phil leads the commercial teams across the region, across all distribution lines of business, including linear and digital branded services, regional and global content distribution, and consumer products. Working with key partners across the region, including StarHub, TrueVision, Sony, NHK, KBS, Thai, PBS, Discovery, Netflix, Unext, SK Telecom, and Wow. Recently, BBC Studios expanded the distribution of its BBC branded channels in Malaysia with Astro and AIS in Thailand. Prior to this appointment, Phil was SVP, that is Senior Vice President, Commercial Strategy for BBC Studios Asia from June 2020, leading the business growth strategy across the Asia region, including Greater China. This followed a 6-month period as the Acting General Manager for Greater China, alongside his role as Senior Vice President, Commercial Operations and Strategy. During this time, Phil led the business and the team to secure a multi-regional partnership with Huawei, a broad content partnership with Jigua or ByteDance, I hope I pronounced that right, Jigua, and he also launched BBC First on My Video in Taiwan. In fact, Phil first moved to BBC Studios, then BBC Worldwide in 2014 to be the financial controller for Asia. From 2016 to 2018, Phil became VP Finance Asia, leading the finance function across the region and a member of the Asia board for BBC Studios. In 2018, Phil's role expanded to include business operations for China, commercial operations, and strategy across Asia. Phil started his career in Grant Thornton, UK, in the Business Risk Services team and is a chartered accountant. He first joined the BBC in an internal audit role before later joining BBC Studios in 2014. So that's my very special guest on this episode of The Master's Voice, Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager Asia BBC Studios, a true blue media professional, business head with diverse experience across business and finance leadership. A strategic business leader who thinks and evaluates every deal from the creative, management, and finance side. Phil, thanks for being on the show and agreeing to this recording at a late evening hour for you in Singapore. It's a pleasure to have you on The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com.
It's fantastic to be here, and thank you so much for having me on The Master's Voice. I'm really pleased.
Thank you very much, Phil. And thanks also to Neeti Mehta of Pitchfork Partners for setting this up so wonderfully well. And also a big thank you to Gwendolyn Lee from your Singapore office. Phil, you have extensive knowledge and experience in the South and Southeast Asia and the South Korea and Japan markets. What are the characteristics of the overall Asia market and how is the India market different from the others? What's unique about the India market to you?
I'm very humbled that you describe me as having extensive experience of such a diverse and exciting market. Whenever I think about Asia, it's very difficult to talk about it as a single market. Every territory has its own nuances and its own special elements. For us, we really try and find the right route to market in each of the territories we operate in. It really is about bringing the content that works across the whole region. So, university popular factual content, our edutainment, children's content, and the kind of great storytelling of our scripted. In India specifically, India is such a kind of eclectic and diverse market in and of itself. It's very difficult to talk about India as a single market, actually. It's very different from north to south, the Hindi, the Tamil market, it's incredibly exciting for us. And one thing that is unique about India is that just the amount of choice. There's no other market in our territories where there's so many services, so many options for an audience to enjoy content. Really for us, it's about finding the right platforms, finding the right partners to reach those audiences, whether it's pay TV, whether it's OTT, whether it's DTT, there's just so much. And there's a huge number of options. And we really, work hard with our partners to find the BBC content that cuts through and reaches our audience.
Yeah, and actually India, like you said, is not one market. It's like so many nations within one nation, so many cultures, and such a huge treasury of stories that can be picked from here and told. So, Phil, what's your presence like, BBC Studios' presence like in the India market? How do you market and promote yourself in the B2B space? Because it helps for viewers also to know that, a show or a piece of content has come from the BBC Studios. It's a great rub-off, considering it's the BBC lineage. So, 2 questions. 1, what is your presence like in the India market? And 2, how do you market yourself in the space in India?
The BBC is the home of kind of bold British creativity, and for India we're bringing that to our audience through multiple lines of business. So we have our distribution business, which I lead for the territory. We also have a production business where we make local content for local broadcasters and platforms, and then of course there's our news content that has huge reach in India. Particularly our, from a BBC Studios perspective, that's about world news distribution for us. In the B2B space, we have, really close-knit relationships with, multiple partners. I'll just pick out a couple to give you some examples. We have a joint venture with Sony where we, operate the Sony BBC Earth channel together, a fantastic kind of infotainment channel that's really bringing, the best of our natural history, science and engineering, those STEM subject areas to audiences in India. And we have a great collaboration with Sony to find the right content from our pipeline that really fits for the Indian audience. And then we also have, a B2B relationship through our channels. We distribute our CBeebies channel through affiliates throughout the country. I think we're working with around 30 affiliates now and, reaching, almost 30 million homes with the CBeebies channel, both through, joint ventures where we're operating services, but also through, working with partners. And then, of course, there's our content distribution. And I think many of your listeners will be familiar with big platforms who carry quite a lot of BBC content, whether that's Disney Plus through our kind of global and regional relationships, Disney Plus Hotstar, we've had both, great content like Doctor Who on Disney Plus Hotstar, and then of course we're producing content with Applause that goes onto the Disney Plus Hotstar. We've got a great relationship with Lionsgate Play in the market where they take some of our kind of newest and boldest scripted content. And then we have, other relationships with partners like Z and, Star for the kind of broadcast market, which, continues to thrive in India.
Wow.
And to answer your question about how we market ourselves, I think the BBC brand is synonymous with news, globally. So for us at BBC Studios, of course, we're part of distributing the World News Channel, but, it's really about our entertainment brand. So as I said, it's about working with partners to bring, world-class content to the Indian audience, whether it's well-known content like Doctor Who or Top Gear that's coming through, or our locally produced content. We really try and, highlight our bold British creativity. We try and highlight the capabilities we have and the world-famous IP that we carry. And we bring that to an audience through we bring that into the market through a mix of, participating in trade events, working closely with our partners to make sure our content's highlighted. And those are areas that, obviously during the last 2 years, it's been very difficult because we haven't been able to visit the market so easily. Myself, I haven't been to India for a couple of years now, and, hopefully that will come back soon.
Great. Phil, BBC Studios also recently relaunched, as you said, its popular children's channel CBeebies in India after 8 years. It's a dedicated preschool channel that brings 100% ad-free content to India. How do you approach creating content for a multi-genre channel like CBeebies that is aimed at children aged 6 years and younger? There must be some real special inputs and for you to decide on what to produce and how to offer it.
First of all, I just want to say it's fantastic to have the channel back in India. I think, there's really an audience for high quality children's content that parents can trust. To answer your question, right, there isn't, I don't think there's a formula to it, but, there is some complicated thinking that goes into it. I think, our children's content, we really focus on that edutainment space. We try and bring, good values into our content. We try and bring good messages and things that are educational, but also, keep it alive, because obviously for an audience of, younger than 6, you need to keep it entertaining and you need to keep it bright and bold. one thing that we do that hopefully, your audience will find interesting is we work with child development specialists, very closely on when we're developing content. And we're very selective about our pipeline of content, where we spend our time to create content that really fits with, first of all, with the BBC brand, but really fits with the content that goes on to CBeebies. Those child development experts help us to put, specific curriculum goals into our content. And that I think is part of the special sauce, but, it's also, really about picking out the best IP that works kind of on screen and off screen.
Wonderful, wonderful. And in its relaunched avatar, what is the range of programming that CBeebies offers? Animation to live action, etc. I mean, it's a great enabler, especially during the lockdown, as CBeebies content is designed to encourage learning through play in a consistently safe environment. And nowadays, kids, in their very, very early years in school or in kindergarten, they really need tactile sort of learning and also to be with and interact with their own peers, so to speak. So it's really useful for sure. You must, of course, market it to the parents, but do share how you do it. What's the marketing mix like, and how well has the relaunched CBeebies resonated with viewers in India?
For parents, I think our positioning is really around, we are a safe and trusted brand. You can, and as you said earlier, the channel's 100% ad free. What children are going to get when they come to CBeebies is really just about the content. So we focus on, in terms of animation, I think we try and find kind of wholesome entertainment in that animation space. I mean, some of the key titles for us are Go Jetters, which is really about, travel and learning about the world. Hey Dougie, which is all about that learning through play. It's about, tasks and tools. And of course, we've just launched in this year, Bluey on the channel, which has had a huge success across the world, from its home market in Australia to the US and to the UK. And we're already seeing great performance in India. The preschool market also there's a lot of space there for live action content. And one of the things that works really well for us on CBeebies is we've got a series around Andy's Aquatic Adventures, which mixes, some of our natural history content, some of that content kind of famous shows that tell the story of the natural world, but, overlay it with someone who helps to interpret that for children, helps to tell stories and make it fun for them to learn.
Wow, that's good. Very interesting. And you work with child specialists and, psychologists and educators, etc. That's really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that, when we pull together the content that goes onto CBeebies, almost all of the content comes through the BBC pipeline. It's about that kind of quality and universal appeal of that content. And I think in terms of, you asked the question around how we market it, a lot of it is about those areas. It's about how do we get those messages across to parents, and to some extent get it across to kids, but it's really, the parents who make the decisions for children when they're under 6. So it's about making sure that people understand that quality content is available there. And, what we've seen as well is that BBC brand and, that combination with that kind of high quality educational content means that, we have stuff that works on screen and off screen. And, that's very true for our children's content, but also true for, some of our older content, like Doctor Who's and the Top Gears of the world. People recognise those brands and they know them as a kind of trusted brand that they're going to come for entertainment.
And you also have Indian experts that you work with, right? I mean, you don't have to name them, but you do have experts from India who you work with, right, when you're making content for Indian children?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we work closely with people who really think about how that content will work internationally. So, we co-commission content between our UK CBeebies channel and the international CBeebies channels. And we really think about how will content travel into the different markets that we operate in. Obviously, Asia's a critical market for that, and India's a big part of that, having such a huge audience here. And one of the things that we are, exploring, and maybe we'll come on to this later, is around how we find more content from the region that fits with that CBeebies profile. And that's something we're very keen to explore with people who've got great ideas in that area.
Great. Time for a little break. You're with The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm your host and friend Pavan Chawla, and my very special guest today is respected media leader Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia, BBC Studios. Taking a little break, and we'll be circling right back. Stay tuned. And we are back. You're tuned to The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm its founder, editor, and your host and friend, Pavan Chawla. And with me is Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia, BBC Studios. So, the pandemic, Phil, has given a fillip to digital streaming video consumption, read OTT. Can you give us the overview from your perspective, from your point of view of the OTT transformation? There's been growth, of course, but how has the pandemic accelerated shifts in consumer behaviors? And what's your broad overview of the OTT transformation? Share that, please.
For sure. I think the OTT transformation was already happening. I think particularly in India, the volume of services available in India, led not only by the kind of broadcaster platforms, but also by the kind of homegrown VOD services. And, we've definitely seen an acceleration during the pandemic. I think, that kind of perfect combination of people having a bit more time at home, a lot more time at home in many of our markets, but also that increasing connectivity and access. I think the increase of kind of, 3G, 4G and now 5G connectivity and, fixed broadband has really meant that, that access for the masses into that OTT world has been a bit easier. And, we've seen that shift, not just in India, we've seen that shift on our services in the rest of Asia. In Singapore and Malaysia, for example, we have a BBC player that's available for audiences there. And, our children's content, it became very, very sticky during the pandemic. And, we had I think it was around a 200% increase in the volume of kind of minutes consumed during that period, which is already quite high. So I think that transformation is as I said, it was already happening. Lots of the market reports, I think PwC predicted that, the APAC OTT market would exceed the US's this year. I think that's probably true. In terms of, other reports have identified, the OTT business globally will become, $400-500 billion in the next 5 years.
Right.
There's so many platforms there. We may see some consolidation over time. As I said earlier, there's so much choice, but you wonder, will all of those platforms find their audiences? I think hopefully many of them will, because I think this OTT world allows people to be a bit more selective about what they consume and, find the content that they're looking for. I mean, a few of the takeaways for us from the kind of OTT transformation over the last year has been, it really has been important to have quite a deep catalogue of content. I think in a period where you couldn't produce new content to serve the OTT audience, it was really important that we, that we brought our kind of well-known titles to the market and some less well-known titles that, surfaced and found an audience. I think that's an interesting takeaway for us. And, we'll continue to work on that with platforms.
Right, Phil. Looking ahead, what opportunity does BBC Studios see ahead? What's BBC Studios' outlook for India and the region? What is it doing to embrace and make the most of, all the change that's happened in the recent past? When you look at formats and genres, content for small and big screen, OTT and linear TVs, etc. Tell us.
Yeah, I think I could give you a very long answer to this, I think, but I'll try and keep it short. I think there's 2 or 3 things that come out for me in this. I think, we've got an ambition to continue to expand the reach of our pipeline into the market, our UK produced content. That's very important for us. I think that's something that our audience expects from us. And, we've got a number of partnerships in the market, with Sony, with Discovery, with Disney Hotstar, where we bring the kind of best of our factual and scripted, and through our CBeebies channel, we bring the children's content to the market. So we want to continue to do that. And I think there's a direction there around bigger partnerships with some of our customers in India as they expand their business. I think, we've had great success in India with producing local content. Really through, partnerships with people like Applause, we've brought, content to Disney Plus Hotstar, including versions of The Office, Out of Love, Criminal Justice, that have just performed really, really well over the last year. And I think more opportunities to work in that scripted space. We've continued to produce some factual content through our kind of Mumbai-based production business as well. But we really have that ambition to produce even more local content, generated not just in India. I think that, India is a big part of that plan because we've got an established business there, but also in the rest of the region. And we've had great success with, Korean formats. We've got some unscripted content being made across the region. I think we'll want to continue to do that as well. And then I think there's the final point I'll make is just around, kind of looking to the future about, one of the growth areas that I think the BBC will want to be in and we're looking for opportunities in is that kind of edutainment and education space. I think as we mentioned earlier, we have a brand that I think people trust. It resonates. It's synonymous with, educating, inform and entertaining. And we really feel like there's potential for that. And I think India's a fantastic market for that. And I think one lesson that we've all had from the last 2 years has been, the importance of having educational content available. Not just for children, but for all of us, in this time where all of these services are exploding. I think those are 3 areas that I would pick out.
Lovely. That's a really nice roadmap you have in front of you. And you've done a lot of great work with every brand, everybody out there who's in the business of taking great content to interested people. So very nice indeed. What have been the BBC Studios' biggest content innovations all time and recent? Just pick 3 favorites.
I think one area that we've always been pushing the boundaries, particularly from a production perspective, has been in our natural history unit. The Planets franchise, the fantastic titles, Blue Planet, most recently A Perfect Planet, and then, Green Planet is coming up. We've always been looking for new ways and adopting new techniques to create content. Green Planet, which comes up early next year, is telling the story of the plants on planet Earth in a way that's never been told before. And we've had to use new techniques to capture that content. Because of the pandemic, actually some of our crews had to shoot things at home in their own garden to, capture content that works for the show. And we've always been pushing the boundaries in that area. There's a couple of other things that I think are linked to that, which I'd like to think are innovations for us, which is the sustainability messages that we're trying to land, mainly through our factual content, but actually, across our content. I think we've got both sustainability messages within the content, and, trying to tell that story. And I think, Blue Planet 2, which was released in 2017, really told the story of kind of single-use plastics and the impact it was having on the ocean. We saw an uptick of the interest in that, particularly in the UK and the US. I think even the Great British, beach cleanup had more attendees in 2018 than 2017. And I'd like to think that we were a part of that. But it's not just about the sustainable, messages in the content. It's also the sustainable production practices. We've long been a part of a kind of project in the UK called the kind of Albert Sustainability or Albert Carbon Footprint. And you'll see that production mark on the end of a lot of our shows, which means that we've really tried to manage that production sustainably. And everyone who listens to your show who knows production, it can be very resource consumptive to produce some of these shows. So that's been something we've really looked at. And I think the last thing, I know this, tried to limit it to just 3, but the last thing I'd flag is there's an innovation that we're trying to capture now, which is about getting new voices into our content. So, it is about, growing that pipeline of talent who are making content. We've launched an initiative called the Emerging Creators Group in the UK, which kind of brings, a mix of emerging writers, influencers from social media, and tries to, bring them into producing content and to some extent shining a spotlight on underrepresented groups, within content, and trying to bring some of those stories to screen. And, that's an area I think is really exciting for us. Wonderful.
Really, all of them very, very important areas must become focus areas for every single content producer from the smallest mom and pop shop to the biggest broadcasting conglomerate. I think everybody really needs to be very, very conscious and responsible in these areas. And wonderful. Thank you for showing the light. Time for a little break. You're with The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm your host and friend Pavan Chawla, and my very special guest today is respected media leader Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia, BBC Studios. Taking a little break, and we'll be circling right back. Stay tuned. And we are back. You're tuned to The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm its founder, editor, and your host and friend Pavan Chawla. And with me is Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia, BBC Studios. Let's talk about creative deals, Phil, and long-term strategic partnerships. I'm sure the many areas you've shown in, Phil, has been in your ability to drive long-term strategic partnerships on the back of great creative content and deals. For instance, during your capacity as acting GM for BBC Studios Greater China, you've led the team to secure a broad content partnership with Jigua ByteDance. You launched BBC First with My Video in Taiwan. So give me the executive summary of the insights from those experiences and also any lessons learned from there. And how do these experiences translate into how you work with partners in the region?
I think I'll pick up on those specific experiences. I think, particularly organizations like ByteDance, but, many of the kind of social media and technology platforms, their ecosystem is so fascinating. And, one thing that you really need to do, when you're working with partners is think long term with them to understand their ecosystem, understand what's important for their audiences, understand what role, the BBC and the BBC's content can play. It's going to play in that ecosystem, and what the best way for us to work together is. So, that could be through co-production, it could be through production, it could just be through, content distribution. But all of those things are about, for me, the kind of finding those long-term strategic partnerships is about finding value for both parties. And it is about finding, where does BBC Studios' strengths meet, our partners' strengths, and what can that kind of bold British creativity that we can bring, or some of our world famous IP, or some of our, our production capabilities in the areas that we're well known in. What can we bring to the partnership, and how can we plan together and, work together to really create something that adds value for platforms long term. I mean, a great example of that, a couple of great examples of that in India would be, Sony BBC Earth. We operate that channel, together. It's something that we work closely with Sony on, particularly around the editorial, around finding, the right content for the Indian audience. I think that's something that, you have to work hand in hand to do. But similarly, we have kind of global relationships that we then translate into local relationships. I mentioned earlier we work with Discovery Plus, and that's a great example of that. But it's not only Discovery Plus, it's also platforms like Disney, Netflix, Amazon, where we have relationships outside of India, and we try and bring those lessons into our relationships in India so that we find value for both of us.
Wonderful. What about any Indian IPs or IPs that you would have created in India that you may have taken internationally? Any examples?
Most recently, we've had some of our shows that we've made with Disney Plus Hotstar has been carried on Disney Plus Hotstar around the region. And, together with Applause, our co-producers on that content, we've managed to bring, some of that content to those audiences, including Out of Love, which has travelled really well across the region. So I think we will look for more opportunities to do that. I think that is about finding the right stories. We're lucky that we have some stories from BBC perspective that work in many markets, and making Indian versions or making content in India that can travel, I think is something that could be really, really exciting for us, and I'd be incredibly keen to do more of it.
Lovely. And how much time does it take? Imagine, if I were a producer and I came to you and I said, hey, I have this great idea. I'm a creative director, writer, whoever. And you like the idea and you say, okay, we'll commission it. But obviously we'll work together and we'll supervise you creatively and make sure that everything is, spick and span, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, all of that creatively and even in the execution. How much time does it take, from the first approval that is signed till the show? Let's say it's a scripted show of maybe 10 episodes to the first season on an OTT platform. How much time does it take for a show to come from thought and first approval to the screen? I'm talking about a scripted series.
I think, there is no one size fits all for this. And I'm sure, many of your audience of The Master's Voice will know a lot about the production process, and you can't give a simple answer sometimes. But I think, in India, I'll talk about India specifically. The market moves very fast. People operate at speed, and there is no weekday, weekend, there is no day and evening. People work incredibly hard to get these things over the line. And I think one of the things that we've found is that, we can move fast with our partners, especially partners who we've worked with before. Notwithstanding the challenges of the last 2 years, we've produced some fantastic content, and, we've managed to bring that to market relatively quickly, given the circumstances. And so I'm afraid I can't give you an exact timeline, but it's something we can do quickly. However, I will admit, and many of your listeners will know, that it sometimes takes longer than you expect, because actually that creative process, that development process is really important. You've got to make sure that the story's right. You've got to make sure it's going to resonate with the audience. Sometimes the casting takes a long time. So I can't give you a straight answer. I'd love to, but, and I think if the two of us could figure out exactly what the timeline looked like, I think we could do a lot of business. But I think it is about finding the right story. It's about finding the right partners. And it is about making sure that we deliver for the audience. And that's really what's most important to us.
Okay. Your brief outlook on the overall developments and trends within the industry, India and Asia. Let's look at the Indian market, where BBC Studios has a joint venture channel, Sony BBC Earth, and pretty substantial content sales with partners like the relatively recently launched Lionsgate Play and Discovery Plus, and international production and formats business. So as a content provider, how do you plan to drive BBC Studios branded services and content distribution strategy in India and in the Asian region?
So I think for us, it's about, there's three pillars to the strategy for us. The three pillars are, strong branded services. I think that's very critical for us in India. It is about creative hits. It's about finding that content, whether it's our UK pipeline or whether it's local content. And it's about major partnerships and, major customer relationships. So those three things are the kind of pillars of our strategy for Asia, but, globally, and for Asia and India, what that means is it is about finding those kind of multi-line of business partnerships with some of the platforms in India, both, content distribution and local production and maybe some global co-production. I think those are areas, we want to drive in India. I think there's definite appetite in the market and opportunity for us there. I think it is about, strengthening, BBC Studios' relationship with, partners across Asia to some, and finding ways, as we were just discussing earlier, bringing content that's generated in the region to audiences across the region and audiences globally. And we have a number of kind of long-standing partnerships that we do that through, not only some of the partners I've already mentioned, but also, major public broadcasters, across the region, including, NHK in Japan, KBS in Korea. That's really an area for us, is finding ways to collaborate with those partners. I think the other thing that going back to those pillars, we really value the branded services positions that we have. In India, CBeebies coming back to the market is so exciting for us, and it's just fantastic to have that. And there's still a huge audience that reaches, and I think that's something we'll continue. And across Asia, we're expanding our branded services business. We've launched with a couple of new partners just in the last few months, and hopefully there'll be more as we continue that business. The thing that keeps coming back to me is it's about finding the content that works for the audience here, and driving the strategy in India needs to be built on that. So we've kind of got the pillars of, you've got the kind of commercial relationships and those broad partnerships. You've got the bringing together in terms of delivering content through our branded services, but really it is about finding content that works, and that's really what we're hoping will drive our business both in India and across Asia.
Right, Phil, very, very insightful indeed, and a lot of professional insights and a lot of wisdom from your experience there, which brings me to something which is perhaps a little on the personal side in terms of how you evaluate people. Okay, a youngster comes to you, sure, HR has sent them to you so they have the requisite experience and ability, etc. But what are the 3 or 4 very important, call them qualities or skills or talent or attitudes or values or whatever, 3 things perhaps, or whatever number you want to give me, which are non-negotiable if the person doesn't have them?
I think it is one of the most challenging things as a leader, pick the right team. Not just to pick, but to pick and develop. And, I'm very passionate about giving people a great experience when they work for us. So actually one of the qualities I look for when I'm hiring someone is someone who has the passion. They want to work for the organisation. They feel like, and we both feel that they can develop, they can grow with us. It's not just about the job today, it's about the job after that and the job after that. So I like to really look for people who understand why they're joining this organisation. They get, the route that it can take them on. I think we're very lucky at BBC. We attract a lot of people like that. I think, a couple of the qualities I look for in people are, I really value collaboration. I think it's something that we really value highly. I personally value incredibly highly. We talked about the different lines of business we operate in India. That isn't all me, obviously. There's a whole team of people, and I don't even, we couldn't deliver what we deliver without, great collaboration. And I think when we talk about the creative processes and like where great ideas come from, it is about that collaboration and, treating each other with respect and treating each other as equals is very important. I think that's something else. I think the third thing I would flag, which is a hot topic at the moment, and I think it's something that we're really thinking about as an organisation, is around diversity and inclusion. It's about what qualities will this person bring to the team? Now, there's all kinds of ways you can measure that. One of the things that I value very highly is diversity of thought. I like to hear different voices. I like to be challenged. I like to be tested. And I think that is something that you can only do if you have a diverse group of people. And I think that's another factor that I really think about a lot when I'm bringing together a team. And, even if we lack that diversity in the group who are working on something, we'll bring someone in from another part of the organisation just to give that perspective. And I think that, those are a few areas I would pick out. And then, the final area I think it's really about, someone who feels like they're passionate about what they're going to do. I think that's very important to me. And I think, I'm sure, your reader, people who consume Mediabrief.com, the people who listen to the Master's Voice are people who would understand that. This is a labour of love at times, and I think that's, it's very important to get people who really have that kind of A-grade attitude. Even if they don't have the experience, if they have the A-grade attitude, they can succeed.
Excellent. Very good indeed. I'm sure a lot of my friends and readers and users of Mediabrief.com who are in HR and talent management will take a lot of insight from this. Very, very good indeed. Thank you very much. I'm glad I asked you that.
The two elements of that, diverse thinking, but with collaboration. I'd say of all the markets I operate in, India's the market where you might hear the most shouting and the most excitement in the room, but it's not a sign of disagreement. It's a sign of debate. It's a sign of passion. And I think those two things, the kind of bringing that different voice and collaborating are two things that have to come hand in hand.
Wonderful, Phil. I enjoyed my conversation with you. Any thoughts on the little chat we've had so far?
It's been fantastic. And, I really appreciate the opportunity to join the Master's Voice. It's just a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Phil Hardman, Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia BBC Studios, was my very special guest on this episode of The Master's Voice from Mediabrief.com. I truly enjoyed and benefited from all the insights and wisdom Phil shared from his amazing experience. I hope and I'm sure you did too. So thank you again, Phil. Thank you, Neeti Mehta from Pitchfork Partners and Gwendolyn Lee from BBC Studios Singapore for making this possible. Till we meet again in the next episode of The Master's Voice from Mediabrief.com, this is your host and friend Pavan Chawla saying, take care, stay safe, bye-bye.